in theory, you're taught that, okay, the best way to do that is to work hard, be smart, be talented, create something innovative, right? But in reality, the best way to make money is by cheating, okay? What is cheating? Cheating is basically creating a monopoly. And then you're forced, and everyone's just forced to pay as much as you want, okay? So John Rockefeller, Bill Gates, these were all monopolists, and they were the wealthiest people in human history, okay? All right, so after World War II, America is the only major industrial nation left standing. And America uses the opportunity to rebuild both its economy as well as the global economy. And it does so by transferring its wartime economy into a peacetime economy. Okay, in a wartime economy, you are manufacturing goods at mass, right? When a peacetime economy, you're also doing that. The problem, though, is now that you have peace, who's going to buy these products? So what America did was it basically said to Europe, we'll make these products, these manufactured goods, these cars, and you will buy them. Europe's like, we have no money. And America's like, don't worry about it. We'll lend you the money, okay? And so this worked out really well for America. If you were a white high school graduate, male in America in the 1950s and 60s, 70s, you had the best life. You lived better than the nobility of Rome, okay? This is just a guy, he could be a salesperson, he could be a clerk, he could be a factory worker, but he had a car. In fact, he probably had 2 cars. He had his own house. His wife didn't have to work, and he could send his 3 kids to college. Also, they could take 1 or 2 vacations a year to Europe. It was really the best life. And that's what the Pax Americana created, okay? Prosperity and peace for the American middle class. But the problem is that over time, the Germans start to catch up. The Germans were destroyed in World War II, so they were incentivized to work together, to work hard, to rebuild their civilization. And German manufacturing became famous throughout the world, as did Japanese manufacturing, okay? So now what's happening is, because of the superiority of German and Japanese manufactured goods, America was transitioning from a creditor nation, where everyone owed it money, to a debtor nation, where its consumers were buying things that they couldn't really afford from overseas, okay? And again, America could do so because America had the US dollar as the reserve currency. 1961, Dwight Eisenhower is retiring from the presidency, and he says to the American people, I know we are at war with the Soviet Union, it's a Cold War, but we don't have any real enemies. Our enemies are all internal. There is currently in place something called the military-industrial complex. They employ millions of people, they manufacture weapons, and they're intent on war. They are our true enemy. If we allow the military-industrial complex to hijack the American political system, then we'll be constantly fighting these useless wars that will bankrupt our nation. Be aware. This is our greatest threat to our nation in our history. Okay? This is his farewell address. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced powers exists and will persist. We must never let the weight of this combination endanger our liberties or democratic processes. Okay? He's talking about the military-industrial complex. And it proved present and prophetic because after he retired, America will start engaging in wars around the world that it could neither afford nor could it fight properly, and it bankrupted America. The most famous example is the Vietnam War, okay? Where America lost about 50,000 soldiers and killed millions and millions of Vietnamese civilians. It was a pointless, brutal war that almost bankrupted America. And it almost caused a civil war in America, right? At this time, America was also competing with the Soviet Union in the space race, right? So in 1969, America sent a man to the moon. And this is a real picture, okay? Now some of you who might be conspiracy theorists, okay? Not me, but some of you might be conspiracy theorists say, wait a minute here! Why is the lighting perfect on the moon, right? And why are there no stars in space? And why is this flag floating around, okay? Conspiracy theorists would ask these questions. I don't ask these questions because I'm not a conspiracy theorist. Just so we're completely sure. Okay. Also, at this time, Lyndon B. Johnson announced the Great Society, which was this fantastic social program to ensure that each and every American had an opportunity at the American dream. Okay, so you had free healthcare for the elderly. You had programs like Head Start. It was fantastic, but it's also really, really expensive. So if you are a nation like France, you're like, you know what? America is sending people to the moon. It's fighting all these pointless wars, and it's building all these great social programs for its population. Does America have the money to do this? In other words, is it possible that the US currency, the US dollar, is no longer able to repay its obligations? That's why France, under Charles de Gaulle, sent warships to America in the mid-60s to repatriate its gold. It's afraid that America will go bankrupt. And this proved very, very wise. And after France did this, there's now this fear among Americans that every nation will do this. And then every nation did this, America will go bankrupt, right? That's why in the year 1971, Richard Nixon announces the US dollar will no longer be tied to gold, which means that you can't use US dollars to buy gold anymore. Which means what? Which means the US dollar is based on nothing. The value of the US dollar is now based primarily on people's faith in its value. Okay? So this leads to a lot of problems like inflation and oil shock. So to solve this problem, in 1973, Nixon signs an agreement with Saudi Arabia. Basically, the agreement is that from now on, Saudi Arabia, which is the world's largest oil exporter, will only take payments in US dollars. And whatever savings that Saudi Arabia has will be invested in US treasuries. Okay? So this is what we call the petrodollar. And the idea here is now the value of the US dollar is tied to the value of oil, okay? You can always exchange US dollars for oil. But then Nixon did something that was extremely clever. He went to China, okay? So for the longest time, China and the United States were at a Cold War. Americans basically isolated China. So in 1972, Nixon visited Mao Zedong. Why? The answer is very simple. Because he needed more consumers to buy US dollars. Does that make sense? He needed people to want US dollars. He needed to create a US dollar addiction. And to do this, what did America do? America gave China everything. America started to ship its factories overseas to China. America gave all its expertise and technology to China. America started to educate the Chinese elite. And what's really important is American defense companies started to give military secret technology to China. Okay? Now, I know that in the United States, people believe that China stole this technology. China didn't have to steal this technology because America gave it to China for free. Okay? Why would America do this? To create dependence on America. Because once the dependence is created, then Chinese will want US dollars. Okay? The intention has always been to create a market for US dollars in order to prop up the US currency. Okay? Does that make sense? So Saudi Arabia gave its oil to the United States, and China gave its labor, okay, its most precious commodity, to the United States in exchange for US dollars. All right, so why is this important? Let's look at the case of Japan. The year is 1985, okay? And this is something called the Plaza Accord. The Plaza Accord was between the central bankers and the finance ministries of different nations, but primarily between the United States and Japan. Japan at this point was an export powerhouse. It was the second largest economy in the world, high savings rate. People really didn't want to buy American goods, but Americans love Japanese goods. Okay, so it's creating this trade imbalance. And Japan was growing and becoming an economic powerhouse. So America said to Japan, listen, you guys need to restructure your economy because your consumers aren't spending any money. This creates trade imbalance. And ultimately, this will lead to structural problems in Japan. So what we're going to do is we will revalue the Japanese currency. We will appreciate it we will appreciate it against the US dollar. Okay? So as Japanese consumers, you're able to buy more from the United States. Now, Japanese economists thought this was a terrible idea. But because America has military bases in Japan, Japan didn't really have a choice in the matter, right? And so this created the Japanese explosion of wealth, okay? So they were by Rockefeller Plaza in New York City, and this created a fear of Japan in the United States.